Do you ever notice how many crime dramas there are on TV these days? Do you guys like crime dramas? Yeah? A few of you? Okay. Well, there are so many of them. I remember back when I lived in Beaton, we couldn't afford to have cable, and I had this little TV, and I was living in the church manse. And so what I would do when I wanted TV is I would drive to Alliston, and I would go to Blockbuster, and I'd rent a season of CSI, the original crime scene investigation, or whatever it's called. And I think there was like 6 episodes on a rental. And so that's what we would do, is watch these on a cold winter night. And I know that makes me sound really old when I say that. But at one point, I noticed there was the CSI, right? And then after that, there was CSI Miami. Remember that guy? No? Yeah. Oh! So then they came out with CSI New York, which was really, really moody. Didn't really love that one. And then by the time CSI Cyber came out, even though it had Ted Danson and Dawson in it, I never watched that one. Wasn't something that interested me. I'd kind of burnt out on these crime drama procedural type things. But one thing I did learn from watching CSI is that whenever there was a murder or a crime, you had to determine if the person had means, motive, and opportunity. In other words, were they able to carry out the crime? Were they motivated to carry out the crime? And did they just simply find an opportunity to be able to do the crime? I don't know about you, but one of the shows that I really liked later was Castle. Did you ever watch Castle? It's a completely believable premise where a best-selling crime writer teams up with a fantastically gifted New York cop, and they solve crime together. It's fantastic. Castle was always looking for means, motive, and opportunity, and always somewhere right near the end he'd say, well, you know, if I was writing this as a book, this is what I would do. And I mean, Nathan Fillion, am I right? This is an intro that's aimed at a very small part of the congregation. I realize that. As usual. But I did learn a lot from these, especially that whoever you think is guilty in the beginning is never the one who's actually guilty. I did some research on why people kill, because it's something that I have a hard time understanding. And it's complex, but if you want to break it down into something really simple, there are 3 main reasons why people kill. And so we're talking about motive here, one of the first 3. Lust, so something sexually motivated or relationally motivated. Power, if you kill someone, you either remove a rival or you can go up the economic ladder as it is, or greed. There's a reason to kill them that's financially advantageous for you. So lust, power, or greed. So let me ask you this. Why kill Jesus? I don't know if you've ever really spent time thinking about why they killed Jesus. We all know they killed Jesus. We talk about it. Mel Gibson made a very graphic movie, which I haven't seen, about it. But why kill Jesus? We read in the 7th chapter of John this very startling revelation that Jesus, after performing these miracles, and we've been working our way through John, and he fed the 5,000, he went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders were looking for a way to kill him. So he knew that the Jewish leaders wanted to take his life. And the question I have is, what is their motive? Why? Why would these religious men who claim to be servants of God want to kill one of their own kind? Have you ever thought about that much? I mean, we all know they killed Jesus. Every Good Friday we talk about the crucifixion scene. We're confronted with that dark moment in human history. But why? What led to this place of murder? Well, I know that you folks love history lessons. So what I've done today is said, if I'm an investigator, I want to go back and set the scene and try to figure out why they would do this. I want to start with a man named Pompey the Great. I'm sure you all have his picture on your wall too. Pompey the Great was a leading Roman general. He was a statesman, and his career was significant in transforming Rome from a republic to an empire. His adversaries gave him the delightful nickname, the Teenage Butcher, which probably gives you a glimpse into his character. Now, in 63 BC, so we're talking around 60 years before Christ was born, he besieged and he took Jerusalem. So he felt that, and the Romans felt that, Israel was getting a little bit too big for their britches. So they went down, besieged this massive fortress. The temple is a fortress. I don't know if you've ever studied it, with thick, tall walls and a very defensible location. And he besieged it in 63 BC, and he took it. It is said that 12,000 Jewish people died that day. Very few of his soldiers died. And then, once he had breached the walls, once he had killed 12,000 men, he walked into the holiest of holies in the temple. It's the deepest location in the temple. It's a very small room with a big doorway with a thick, heavy curtain as a door. And only once a year were they allowed to go into the holiest of holies. And even then it was the high priest. And he went in once a year to do some cleaning. And so this man from Rome comes down, invades Jerusalem, and enters the holiest of holies. This is a huge moment in Israel's history. This is a huge moment in history in general. The message was clear. This is our house now. This belongs to us. This is Caesar's. Get with it. The next day, he left. He had it ritually cleansed. He went back home, and that is when they began paying serious tribute to Rome. Israel now belonged to Rome, thanks to Pompey the Great. Well, Pompey and Rome left certain Jewish kings in charge. They had this great system where they would come in and take you over, but then let you continue doing your own thing, as long as you kept putting your crops and gold coins and all of that, funneling it back to Rome. It was a system that worked well for everybody. But about 30 years later, the Hasmonean kings that were ruling were, again, getting too big for their britches. So here comes along a guy, I'm going to try to speak again. Here comes along a guy named Herod the Great. You know Herod the Great, right? From a certain story in the Bible. Well, let's talk about Herod the Great. Around 34 BC, he marches down and he deals with the Hasmoneans. It's a 3-year campaign, but he eventually finds victory. And he is then granted rulership of all of that area until 4 BC. He was the king of Judea for many years. And you know him from the story of the 3 wise men. He's the one that they went and visited around 3-4 BC and said, hey, there's a newborn king. We want to worship him. And of course, seeing that he might have a threat to his throne, he decides to kill all the firstborn in that area. Terrible, terrible guy. But here's the thing. He was also a smart man. Herod the Great knew that his rulership was hinged upon making sure that the money continued to funnel to Rome and that generally the people in Israel remained somewhat satisfied. And so he began building projects. He started funneling resources into rebuilding the temple, for example. And so, you know the Temple Mount, you know the Wailing Wall? This guy built that. And it's strange to think that Herod the Great, who tried to kill Jesus, built part of the temple. But it garnered favor. He brought in fresh water. He revamped the ports. He funneled building projects and money into these things, creating jobs, and therefore creating happiness and prosperity. And so in that way, I guess he was great. When he died in 4 BC, he passed the kingdom on to his sons. One of them was Herod Antipas. Now, you know him from the Bible as well. You're going to hear that name later in the Gospels. This is another Herod, a different Herod. Herod Antipas was called a tetrarch. Does anyone know what a tetrarch is? No? Neither did I, so I had to Google it. Actually, I learned it way back in seminary, or I wouldn't know it. It's someone who is a fourth of a ruler. So when you take Herod's territory, you split it into 4. Herod Antipas, one of his sons, was a ruler of 1/4 of his territory. And so he ruled from Herod's death in 4 BC until 39 AD, when he was deposed. Now we call him, in the New Testament, Herod the king, but he never actually was a king. He was a tetrarch. His authority was less than that of his father. And he officially ruled Galilee and Perea as a client state of the Roman Empire. And so again, much like his predecessors, his job was to keep the people happy, prosperous, and funneling wealth back to Rome. You also know him, and he had a great span of peace in his empire. Very few revolts, which means that he was probably a pretty ruthless guy. When there was peace for a sustained period of time back then, it was usually because of an iron rod. And he executed John the Baptist. John the Baptist was gaining a lot of power, a lot of influence, and he opposed Herod's divorce and remarriage and spoke about it publicly. And so it's a bit contrived, but his stepdaughter Salome requested that he be executed, and Herod had that happen. And that's a whole other story. He's also the one who interrogates Jesus in Jerusalem. Here's how it went down. It begins with a guy named Pilate. And Pilate is a contemporary of Herod Antipas. And he governs a region. And when he's in town and the Jews are there for the festival, and Jesus is brought in and questioned, and he's put on trial by the Jews, then he is brought to Pilate. And you know this story pretty well. And so they bring Jesus to Pilate, and they accuse him. They say, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar," which would be, now having given our history lesson, a very bad thing. And he claims to be a Messiah. He claims to be a king. So you guys should be worried, in other words. So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replies. So Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. Remember that, by his teaching. He started in Galilee. He's come all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Are we starting to see the picture here? How the narrative is moving along? What's happening behind the scenes? Pilate brings Jesus to Herod. When Herod saw Jesus, he was so happy. He was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he had hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. Which is kind of funny, because isn't that what all the Jewish people that he'd been ministering to had also wanted? He plied him with many questions, but Jesus, well, he refused to answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, and they were just accusing him left, right, and center. And Herod and his soldiers, since Jesus isn't saying anything, he's not doing anything, and they're not being entertained by him, well, they dress him in an elegant robe, befitting a king. They mock him, and they send him back to Pilate. And here's an interesting little tidbit. that day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before that, they had been enemies. But now they were galvanized by this common experience. So, Pilate calls together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. The chief priests, the rulers in Israel, and the people. And he says to them, "You brought me this man as one who is inciting people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he has sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I'll punish him, I'll give him some lashes, and I'll send him on his way." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man, release Barabbas to us." For the third time, jumping down a bit, he spoke to them. He said, "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. I'll just beat him a little bit, send him on his way, okay?" But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder. That's Barabbas. And they asked for and surrendered Jesus to their will. Friends, why did they kill Jesus? Why kill him? Rome did not condemn Jesus. And we've studied the history. We know that these guys were very, very brutal men who were not afraid to put down any rebellion. And yet they found him innocent. They found him not guilty. Well, to understand this, we need to go to Mark 14. And this is where Jesus is arrested and tried. So as Jesus was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came, and there was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, and they were sent by who? The chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. They took Jesus to the high priest. All the chief priests, the elders, the teachers of the law came together. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him. They came up with false testimony, but it didn't always corroborate. They didn't always agree, and so they knew that that was a dead end. Again, the high priest asked him as he was questioned, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," Jesus said, which is a confession. But if you know your Old Testament, is also the name that God gave in the wilderness to the prophets. I am who I am. So he is confessing, but also in a very profound way. "And you will see the Son of Man," he continues, "sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Well, this is too much for the high priest. He tears his robes. He says, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" And they all condemned him as worthy of death. Why kill Jesus? Is it because he claimed to be God? Now, this is the excuse that they hang everything upon. But if they murdered every single person who was crazy enough to think that they were Messiah or even God, there would be a lot of dead people. I myself have encountered more than one person who told me that they were Jesus incarnate. Why would they kill a crazy man who thought that he was the Messiah, God himself? Why? Well, the people were believing it. That's why. The people were believing it. We need to get back to our original story. Jesus' disciples go to the festival, but Jesus stays behind. There's this festival going on, And Jesus knows it's too dangerous, so they go off to this festival. But Jesus just can't stay away. So halfway through the festival, Jesus goes up to the temple courts and he begins to teach. And the people there, they were amazed. They said, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? He comes from this backwater town. Wasn't he from Nazareth, of all places? Well, Jesus says, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. I didn't learn from a rabbi. I was trained by God the Father himself. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. Essentially, if you are listening to the Holy Spirit, listening to God's ways, and simply enjoying a relationship with God, you would see that the things I'm teaching align with all of that. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him, and Jesus is seeking God's glory in everything he does. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? Why? Why kill Jesus? Well, we said in the beginning that there were 3 reasons to kill: lust, power, and greed. I think that we can check this one off pretty easily. What about power? Was there any power to be gained by killing Jesus? I would say yes. Was there any financial reason to kill Jesus? I would say yes. You see, here's the thing. Jesus threatened their way of life. The teachings of Christ threatened everything that they had built up over the years. The way that the religious leaders lived in Jerusalem, they lived well. They enjoyed authority, respect, and financial wealth. It was one of the highest places of honor and financial gain in their society. And the only reason that people like in the Sanhedrin and the religious leaders and the teachers of the law and even the priesthood themselves, the only reason they continued to exist and enjoy what they did was because Rome allowed it. Because Herod allowed it. Because Pilate allowed it. This was the system in which they lived. If they caused too much trouble, if their people caused too much trouble, and it got back to Rome, well, I'm sure that Rome would find a whole new set of leaders who could keep things in line. Right? So, why kill Jesus? Well, there was all kinds of reasons. Power and greed. He threatened their religious authority, for one thing. The people loved Jesus and the things he taught. The people in the countryside, just regular folk who had never been schooled in rabbinic schools, they resonated with the things he said. When he stood up there and taught about loving your neighbor and loving others and calling God the Father, they got it. So he threatened their religious authority. He threatened their livelihoods. If this Jesus movement gained, Jesus went into the temple, started turning over the moneylenders' tables. Okay, let me tell you something. If you wanted to go make a sacrifice at any of the big religious festivals that happen in Jerusalem, you might have to walk many, many days to get there. You might only go once a year, but it was something that you were called to do. And so you would bring an animal with you on that journey, but it can be very difficult to bring an unblemished lamb on a 5, 6, 8-day journey. And by the time you get there, have it also still unblemished. So you could buy their livestock, but you had to trade in your Roman coins for their special coins. It came at a price. The temple had become a business. Their coffers were overflowing with wealth. Jesus threatened this. He threatened their religious authority, their livelihoods, their commerce, and their political power. They only enjoyed it at the pleasure of Rome, and that could be taken away at any time. And why, oh why, would Herod and Pilate hand them over? Why did Pilate, who said this man is innocent, hand him over to death? You see, the Jewish people, they had their own courts, but they could not convict someone of death. That had to go through Rome. They bullied Pilate into doing so and letting a murderer free. Because Pilate knew that he had to keep his people happy, always walking that tightrope between Israel and Rome. Here's the thing, folks. When our comfort, our security, or even our beliefs are threatened, we can be motivated to take drastic action. And this is why you find anti-maskers protesting in large crowds while people are dying of COVID in long-term care facilities. This is why a young man will strap a bomb to his chest at the behest of his teachers. And this is why an addict will break into cars at 2 a.m. looking for loose change and anything that he can sell. When our way of life is threatened, we will take dramatic actions to put a stop to it, even if those actions are veiled by our religion, our politics, our judicial systems, or even government agencies. And I think this is why it is so hard to make disciples today. Because the teachings of Jesus, they threaten our comfortable lives. When it's so much easier to do whatever we want, whenever we want, in an age of moral relativism, it becomes uncomfortable to hear the words of Christ, who said that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And so, we have means, motive, and opportunity to crucify Christ, even in our culture. His teachings are just too radical. Put others first, love your enemy, forgive everyone, share what you have, hold to your commitments, remain sexually pure, place no other gods before the one true God, even if it's the gods of Amazon Prime and cheap gasoline. These teachings just cannot stand. Crucify him, we shout. He is antiquated. He is passé. He is irrelevant. He is a myth. We hurl accusations at Jesus, hoping that something sticks and we can keep on operating as we have always operated, serving Rome and our contrived ideologies. But if we would just stop and look at Jesus for a second, if we would just listen to his words and observe what he does, and behold the man upon the cross who whispers, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," we just might realize the shocking truth that Jesus does not threaten our way of life. He is life, eternal life, and he is the only one who has the means, the motive, and the opportunity to save us from ourselves.